Arc Raiders is absolutely packed with hidden details, secret developer nods, buried environmental lore, and carefully placed Easter eggs that most players have walked right past without ever realizing what they were looking at. And tonight we are going through every single one of them, from the smallest signatures to the deepest buried secrets hiding in plain sight across the entire game world. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. Alright, quick note on why this video exists and how I assembled it. I have been deep in Arc Raiders content since the early technical tests, and what kept pulling me back in beyond just the gameplay, which is genuinely solid, was the density of environmental detail that Embark Studios packed into every corner of this game. There is stuff on walls, on machines, in audio logs, in the textures of old equipment that most players never stop to look at. So I started documenting it. Screenshots, notes, coordinates, all of it. The main editorial choice I made when building this video was to organize the Easter eggs around a loose narrative thread rather than just dumping them as a list. I wanted to show how these hidden details, when placed side by side, start to suggest something larger about the world before and during the Ark invasion. Some of the connections I draw here are interpretive, and I will flag those clearly when they come up. But the thread is real, and by the time we reach the end, I think you'll see exactly what I mean. Now let us get into it. Chapter 1. The Signal Before the Fall. We start at the very beginning, or rather, at something that appears to be the beginning, encoded throughout the game world in places you would never think to look. Before Ark machines started descending on what remained of civilization, there was a signal. The game acknowledges this in broad strokes as part of its established lore. A transmission of unknown origin preceded the invasion by several days. But what Arc Raiders does not tell you outright, what it leaves for you to find if you are paying close enough attention, is that fragments of this signal appear hidden across the game environment in ways most players walk right past. Once you know what the pattern looks like, it changes how the entire world reads. The signal fragments show up in a few different forms, depending on where you find them. The most common version is a waveform etched or printed onto flat surfaces, walls, equipment panels, the sides of storage containers. At first glance, these look like standard technical markings, the kind of visual noise you expect in an industrial environment. But when you start comparing screenshots from different parts of the map, you notice the waveform is identical across locations. Not similar, identical. The same peaks, the same valleys, the same rhythm. It is not a standard decoration. Someone put the same pattern in multiple places, and that level of intentionality is worth paying attention to. The earliest confirmed appearance of the waveform marking is on the exterior of one of the older radio relay towers scattered across the game's central zone. The tower itself is functionally dead. Nothing you can interact with in any meaningful gameplay sense, just background scenery. But on the eastern face of the base structure, beneath a layer of rust and grime that you would only notice if you get close and look at the texture carefully, the waveform is there. It is faint, the weathering effect on the texture is heavy, but the shape is unmistakable once you've seen it elsewhere and know what you're looking for. That is the first anchor point. What makes the relay tower discovery interesting is not just the waveform itself, but the context around it. Directly below the waveform marking, and this is something several players noticed in the technical test footage before it was widely discussed, there is a small stamped number. The number is partially obscured, but the visible digits are enough to cross-reference with other markings found later. The number appears to be a date, formatted in a non-standard way that initially reads as a serial code. When you rearrange the digit groupings, the date it forms precedes the Ark invasion by almost exactly 37 days. That is not a coincidence that Embark would have left in by accident. The 37-day figure starts to take on weight when you realise it comes up again, not in a direct repeat of the number, but through an indirect route. In one of the later safe house interiors, there is a handwritten calendar pinned to a corkboard. Most of the calendar is unremarkable, the kind of prop detail that fills out a space, but 37 days before the date that most in-game documents use to mark the beginning of the invasion, there is a small red circle on the calendar. Nothing written inside it, just the circle. No explanation, no label. On its own, it would mean nothing. In the context of the relay tower number, it starts to feel like a breadcrumb. The calendar safe house is a location many players visit repeatedly because of its resource density, which means a lot of people have stood in front of that corkboard and looked past the red circle without registering it as meaningful. This is something Embark does deliberately throughout the game, hiding signals in plain sight by surrounding them with enough visual noise that the signal itself gets lost. It is a design philosophy that rewards curiosity over efficiency. The players who are farming resources and moving quickly will never catch it. The players who stop and look at the walls will. There is a third anchor point for the signal fragment pattern, and this one is the most obscured of the three, but also the most explicit in what it suggests. In a partially collapsed building on the eastern edge of one of the outdoor zones, there is a room accessible only through a gap in a collapsed wall that most players either do not notice or do not bother squeezing through because there is nothing in that room worth looting. The room contains a single piece of old communications equipment, a receiver of some kind, sitting on a metal workbench. The receiver's display panel, which uses a faded LED-style texture, shows a readout frozen in a non-zero state. The readout, when interpreted as a frequency value, matches the waveform pattern's implied transmission frequency that fans calculated based on the visual shape of the etching. That last connection between the waveform shape and the frequency readout was not something the game tells you. It was worked out by a community member who happens to have a background in signal analysis and decided to apply it to what looks like a decorative texture. The calculation is not ironclad. The texture resolution limits precision, but the alignment is close enough to be striking. And once that connection was posted online and other players started revisiting the locations with fresh eyes, the whole chain from the relay tower to the calendar to the receiver room suddenly felt a lot less like coincidence and a lot more like a trail. What the trail points toward is a question the game does not answer, but seems to want you to ask. If someone had this equipment running 37 days before the invasion, if they received the signal or something like it, did they know what was coming? The game's surface lore treats the Ark arrival as a surprise, a catastrophe nobody was prepared for. But the physical evidence hidden in the environment suggests at least one person in at least one location had some kind of advanced knowledge. Whether they understood what the signal meant, whether they tried to warn anyone, whether they survived the initial wave, none of that is answered. The trail ends at the receiver in that collapsed room and does not pick back up in any location that has been found so far. The safe house calendar with the red circle has an additional detail that did not surface until several months after the first players started discussing it. Beneath the corkboard, partially hidden behind a tipped-over coffee mug that is part of the prop arrangement, there is a folded piece of paper. The paper is interactive, meaning you can pick it up and look at it in the inventory interface. Most players who found it reported it as blank, which made sense given that blank papers and empty notebooks are common throughout the game as unremarkable props. But in a specific lighting condition, one that only occurs when you enter the room from a particular angle and the ambient light source catches the paper at a low angle, faint text becomes visible on the surface through a normal map detail. The faint text is not long. It reads in partial form because the texture cuts off at the paper's fold lines, something that translates roughly as a set of listening instructions. Not instructions for what to do with the signal, but instructions for how to tune a receiver to pick it up. The frequency bands mentioned match the receiver readout in the collapsed building. This is the closest the game gets to confirming that the pre-invasion signal listening was intentional and deliberate on the part of whoever lived in that safe house. Someone there was waiting for a specific transmission, and they knew how to find it. Moving out from the signal trail and looking at the broader implication, the story this sequence of hidden details tells is one of foreknowledge, and what happens when foreknowledge is not enough. It suggests that the Ark invasion was not a complete surprise to everyone, that somewhere in the world there were people who had picked up the signal, who knew something was coming, but who either could not communicate the threat fast enough, or were not believed when they tried. This is never stated in any cutscene or dialogue. It lives entirely in the hidden layer of the environment, and that is exactly the kind of storytelling that makes Ark Raiders worth spending this much time with. The waveform symbol has one more appearance that connects it to a different part of the Easter egg chain, but we will return to that when we reach the chapter on recurring symbols. For now, it is enough to note that the signal trail is the foundational layer of the hidden narrative running through the game's environment. Everything else we find tends to either confirm or complicate what the signal trail suggests, which is that the Ark invasion was preceded by something that at least a small number of people on the ground were aware of. The question of what happened to those people is the thread that keeps pulling you forward. Looking at the relay tower again, with all of this context in mind, there is one more small detail that deserves mention before we move on. The tower's signal array, the physical antenna structure at the top, is angled. This is not unusual for this type of equipment, but the direction it points when you use the in-game compass and trace the vector out across the map aligns with a specific landmark in the far distance. The landmark in question is a large impact crater, one of the most visually prominent features of the zone, and widely understood in the lore to be one of the earliest Ark landing sites. The tower was pointed at the impact zone. The antenna was oriented toward the origin of the signal, or toward where the first machines eventually came down, long before any of that happened. Now, this could be a coincidence of map design. The crater is a major visual anchor for the zone, and the tower was probably oriented toward it for aesthetic reasons, to give the environment a sense of visual depth and directionality. But given everything else we have already found along this trail, the antenna orientation reads as one more deliberate choice, rather than an accident. Embark Studios put a lot of care into the geometry of this world, and the idea that they accidentally pointed the signal receiving tower at the first Ark impact site strains credibility. The crater itself, which we will explore in more detail in a later chapter, has its own layer of hidden details embedded in its geometry and texturing. But as it relates to the signal trail, what matters for now is that the crater's rim contains a set of metal posts that do not appear to serve any structural purpose and are not present at any other crater site in the game. The posts are arranged in a rough arc shape, which, given the name of the game, is the kind of detail that could be a pun or could be something more. Their spacing, when measured against the in-game scale, matches the peak intervals in the waveform etching found on the relay tower. This is a deeply buried connection that requires a lot of cross-referencing to establish, and it is the kind of thing that only becomes visible when you have already found the earlier parts of the trail. The posts were first identified as significant not by the Easter egg community, but by a player who was doing a base geometry analysis for an entirely different reason, trying to map out the exact boundaries of Ark landing zones for strategic purposes. The posts fell outside what they expected to find and got flagged as anomalous. Once the screenshot reached the right people, the waveform connection was established within a few days. It is a good example of how some of Ark Raiders' best hidden details are found not by people looking for Easter eggs specifically, but by players with unrelated analytical interests who stumble into something they were not expecting. The signal trail, taken as a complete sequence from the relay tower to the calendar to the receiver room, to the paper, to the crater posts, spans a significant portion of the game's central zone. Walking the trail in order takes roughly 15 minutes at exploration pace. It does not offer any gameplay reward. There is no achievement, no unlock, no in-game acknowledgement that you have found any of these things. It exists purely as a layer of storytelling for the players who seek it out. And that restraint, the choice not to reward discovery with a dopamine hit, is one of the most interesting design decisions in the whole game. There is one more element of the signal trail that connects not to the in-game lore directly, but to the real-world development of the game. In a very early pre-release screenshot released by Embark Studios, visible in the background of a focus-pulling promotional shot, one of the walls in what appears to be an early version of the safe house environment has a set of markings on it that do not appear in the final game. Or rather, they do not appear on that wall in the final game. They appear elsewhere. The same markings, the same handwriting style, show up in a different location in the shipped build. This suggests that someone at Embark moved the detail rather than removed it, which is the kind of thing that happens when a hidden detail is intentional and valued by the team, not just incidental set dressing. That real-world connection between the pre-release material and the shipped game is worth holding on to because it appears again in other Easter egg chains. Embark Studios seems to have a culture of deliberately hiding things in their environments and then leaving breadcrumbs in promotional material for the most dedicated players to follow. It is a design tradition with roots in older games. The kind of thing that used to be common before achievement systems made hidden details visible on demand. Ark Raiders is unusual in the current landscape for committing to this approach without any concession to discoverability through official channels. The signal fragment waveform, to wrap this section up before we move forward, does not resolve into anything complete. You cannot reconstruct the full transmission. You cannot play the original signal back. What you can do with enough patience and cross-referencing is establish that it was real, that someone received it, that it predated the invasion by a measurable window, and that the place where it was received was eventually consumed by the invasion itself. The person who circled that date on the calendar, who set up the receiver, who folded the tuning instructions into a paper and left it behind a coffee mug, is gone. The machines came, the building fell, the equipment still shows the last frequency it was locked onto, and 37 days earlier, someone sat in that room and waited for a signal from the sky. Everything about that story is implied rather than stated. The game gives you the fragments and trusts you to assemble them into something coherent. Not everyone will. Most players will never know this story exists, but it does exist in the specific sense that the evidence is there and the chain of connection is real. That is the standard I'm trying to hold this whole video to. Not speculation for its own sake, but interpretation grounded in verifiable in-game details. The signal trail clears that bar, I think, and it sets up the lens through which the rest of this video is best understood. One last thread related to the signal chapter before we transition. The number 37 comes up one more time in the game in a way that does not connect to the signal trail directly, but might be a deliberate echo. In the loading screen tip rotation, which most players disabled or started skipping after seeing each tip a few times, there is a tip about Ark machine patrol behavior that mentions, without explanation, a 37-second cycle. The tip reads as practical information about gameplay mechanics, but 37 seconds, 37 days. It is the same number in two completely different contexts. Whether that is a coincidence or a developer leaving a signature number scattered throughout the game is genuinely unclear. But I flagged it because once you have seen the number matter in one context, you start seeing it elsewhere. And the question of whether that is meaningful or just confirmation bias is one that this whole genre of Easter egg research has to sit with, honestly. The signal chapter gives us our foundation. We have a pre-invasion timeline, a specific individual or group who received advance warning, a geographic anchor in the crater, and a design philosophy from the developers that rewards slow, careful attention over fast resource gathering. Everything else in this video builds on or branches from that foundation in some way. The machines came from somewhere, and someone on the ground knew they were coming. The question is what they did about it, and the game's hidden layer has a few more things to say about that before it goes quiet. One more thought before we close out this chapter. The signal fragment that appears as a waveform etching is always found at approximately the same height on whatever surface it appears on. Roughly chest height for an average human. Not floor level, not ceiling level, not inscribed at a height that would suggest it was made from a standing ladder or from a crouching position. Chest height made by someone standing upright, taking their time. This is a small detail, almost invisible, but it implies someone calm enough to make a careful mark at a careful height, not panicked, not rushed. Whoever left these marks knew what they were doing and why, and they did not leave in a hurry. They marked the walls, and then they went somewhere. Where they went is not in the signal chapter, but a later chapter has a suggestion or two. The waveform marks, the calendar circle, the receiver readout, the tuning note, the crater posts, 5 anchor points in one continuous hidden story. That is the signal before the fall, the part of Ark Raiders that most players will never see, the part that makes the game's world feel like it had real people in it before the machines came down. Chapter 2. What the machines remember. The Ark machines themselves are the most visible element of the entire game. They are what you fight, what you run from, what you study to survive. But buried inside their design, in the textures, the geometry, the sounds they make, and the markings on their chassis, there is a layer of information that most players never engage with because they're too busy either shooting or evading. When you stop fighting and start looking, the machines start telling you things. The most immediately obvious hidden detail on Ark machine exteriors is the presence of alphanumeric codes stamped or embossed on their chassis panels. These look exactly like model numbers or manufacturing codes, the kind of thing you would see on any piece of industrial equipment in the real world. Most players assume that is all they are, visual texture to make the machines feel like manufactured objects rather than magical invaders. But the codes are not random. Several of them have been fully analysed by the community, and the patterns that emerge from that analysis are not what anyone was expecting. The codes on the most common Ark enemy type, the crawler class machines that show up in nearly every encounter in the game, follow a format that breaks into 3 distinct segments when you know how to read the groupings. The first segment in every code seen so far contains a 6-digit number. The second contains a 2-letter prefix from a specific set of letter pairs. The third contains a variable length suffix that changes between individual machines of the same type. This structure is more organized than you would expect from a purely decorative element. It suggests the codes are carrying information in a standardized format. The 6-digit numbers in the first segment, when converted from their apparent base format, resolve to what look like coordinate pairs. Not real-world geographic coordinates, but coordinates that align with the in-game map grid when you apply the scale conversion that dedicated cartographers have worked out for the game's zones. The coordinates do not all cluster in one place. They are spread across the map, but there are concentrations, areas where multiple crawler codes point to the same approximate location, and those concentration points are, without exception, areas of the map that have other hidden details embedded in them, points on other Easter egg trails. This connection between the machine codes and the Easter egg geography of the map was established by a single player who spent an unreasonable amount of time transcribing crawler codes from screenshots and running the calculations. The work took weeks. The thread documenting it online became one of the most cited community resources for Ark Raiders' hidden content. And what it revealed, beyond the coordinate connections, was that the machines appear to be coded with information about the world they're operating in, not information about their mechanical function, information about the terrain, the landmarks, the specific locations that matter to some unknown navigation or cataloging system. The two-letter prefixes in the second segment are harder to decode than the coordinates. The letter pairs appear to reference categories rather than specific data. There are only 12 distinct pairs observed across hundreds of documented machine codes, which suggests a classification system with 12 categories. What those categories represent is not clear from the codes alone, but cross-referencing the prefix types with the behavior patterns of the machines carrying them reveals a suggestive correlation. Machines with certain prefixes are more aggressive. Machines with others tend to patrol tighter loops. Others seem to spend more time in scanning behavior, stopping and slowly rotating as if looking for something specific. If the prefix is a behavior tag, a simple code telling the machine what mode it is operating in, then the machines are not just autonomous in a general sense. They are specifically configured for specific tasks at specific coordinates. The crawler harassing you on a random patrol route might be coded for search and catalog behavior in a specific zone. Another one at the same location might be coded for deterrence. They look the same. They behave similarly enough that you treat them the same. But their codes say they are doing different jobs. And the job list, if the 12 prefix categories are a complete picture, is more varied and purposeful than the random invasion force the game's surface narrative presents. The third segment, the variable suffix, was initially dismissed as a simple unit identifier, like a serial number that makes each machine unique. And that interpretation might still be correct, but a small subset of the suffixes found so far are not variable in the expected way. They are repeated across multiple machines of different types, not just multiple crawlers. The same suffix showing up on a crawler and on a much larger Arc machine type, a different enemy category with a different movement style and attack pattern, suggests the suffix is not just a serial number. It might be a group tag marking machines that belong to the same operational unit or share some directive. The operational unit theory would explain something players have noticed anecdotally for a long time without being able to pin down a cause. Sometimes Arc machines of different types seem to coordinate more effectively than others. A crawler and a larger machine working in the same area will occasionally behave in complementary ways, one cutting off an escape route while the other pushes a player toward it. This has always been attributed to general AI design. But if the machines with matching suffixes are specifically programmed to operate as units, the coordination is not emergent AI behavior. It is intentional design at the coding level, baked into the machines before they ever landed. Stepping back from the code specifically, there is a visual Easter egg on the largest Arc machine types that became famous shortly after the game's technical test went live. On the underside of the main chassis plate of the largest Walker variants, visible only when the machine is tilted or positioned just right, there is a symbol that does not match any other marking in the Arc machine aesthetic vocabulary. The symbol is simple, a circle with a horizontal bar through the center. This symbol appears nowhere else on the machine. It is not part of the damage texture set. It is not part of the mechanical joint geometry. It is a separate, deliberate marking applied to a location almost no one ever sees. The circle with bar symbol is recognizable to anyone familiar with certain pre-war iconography in the game's lore. It appears in archive footage visible in one of the game's early cutscenes, briefly, on the side of a vehicle that belongs to a research institution referenced obliquely in several in-world documents. The institution's name is never given in full in anything publicly accessible in the game, just a fragment of an acronym in a document header. But the symbol's appearance on Arc machines, stamped on the underside of their largest chassis type, suggests a connection between whatever that institution was and the origin of the machines themselves. This is the hidden detail that most immediately opens up the biggest lore question in the game. Were the Ark machines built by humans? The game's surface framing presents them as alien, or at least as extraterrestrial, in origin, invaders from beyond the atmosphere with no earthly connection. But the symbol on the chassis, matching the symbol of a human research institution, visible in a split second of a cutscene, points in a different direction entirely. It points toward the possibility that the machines are at least partly human in origin, that their design or their programming draws from something that existed on Earth before they fell from the sky. The cutscene with the symbol is only a few frames long, and most players watch it once during the tutorial sequence and never revisit it. The vehicle bearing the symbol is in the background of the shot, partially occluded by a foreground element. You would have to be specifically pausing and advancing frame by frame to catch it, and even then, you would have to know what you were looking for. The fact that the same symbol appears on the machines in a similarly obscured location, the underside of the chassis, shows a design consciousness at work that is specifically interested in hiding the connection. Not eliminating it, hiding it. The connection is there to be found, it just requires deliberate effort to find it. Taking the machine codes and the chassis symbol together, the picture that emerges is of Ark machines that are more deeply embedded in human history than the game's overt narrative acknowledges. The codes reference human map coordinates. The symbol connects to a human institution. The behavioral classifications may reflect specific directives that were programmed by someone who understood the terrain and the targets. None of this is spelled out. All of it is buried in the physical details of the enemies you spend most of the game trying to kill without stopping to read the writing on their underside. One of the more recently discovered hidden details on Ark machines involves not the visual design, but the audio. Ark machines make a range of sounds during normal operation, and these sounds have been studied extensively by players trying to get competitive edges on detection and positioning. But a subset of those sounds, the ones emitted during the machine's idle scanning behavior, contain fragments when slowed down and analysed spectrally. The fragments are not clearly intelligible speech. They're closer to processed audio, something that might have once been a voice and has been filtered or compressed beyond easy recognition. But the rhythm of the fragments matches human speech cadence, not the even pulse you would expect from a simple electronic tone. The speech cadence finding was made by a musician and audio engineer in the community who was analysing the game's sound design for an entirely different creative project. When the spectral analysis revealed the cadence pattern, they shared it widely, and the response from the community was significant. Multiple people with audio processing backgrounds attempted to recover or reconstruct the underlying signal with varying degrees of claimed success. The most credible reconstruction attempt produced something that sounds like a string of numbers being read aloud, calmly, at a measured pace. The numbers, if accurate, do not immediately decode to anything obvious, but the possibility that Ark machines are broadcasting fragments of human speech in their idle state is one of the most unsettling Easter egg discoveries in the game. The Ark machine type that most consistently shows the speech cadence pattern in its audio is also the type that displays the circle with bar symbol on its chassis. This is not a coincidence you can dismiss without some effort. The largest Walker variants, the ones with the human institution symbol stamped underneath, are also the ones whose idle sounds contain what sounds like processed human voice. If you were building a theory about these machines having human origins, you would want them to be the same machines. And they are. Looking at individual Ark machines rather than categories, there are specific unit-level Easter eggs that show up rarely and seem to be tied to particular spawn configurations. One crawler that has been documented appearing in a specific area of the map during specific time windows has a handwritten style mark on its left front leg assembly. Not a stamped code, a scratched mark, the kind of thing that looks like it was made by a sharp tool in the field. The mark is 3 small triangles arranged in a row. This appears nowhere else on any Arc Machine's surface. It looks like a tag, the kind of graffiti-style identifier humans leave on things they claim or track. If someone was marking Arc Machines in the field, either to track them or to signal something to other humans, that 3-triangle mark is the closest evidence for it. The question of whether humans are actively interacting with Arc Machines in ways beyond combat, studying them, marking them, potentially communicating with them, is one the game plants seeds for, but never pays off explicitly. The 3-triangle mark on the crawler leg is one seed. The speech fragments in the idle audio are another. The circle with bar symbol on the chassis is another. Individually, any one of them could be explained away. Together they start to build a picture of a relationship between the machines and human actors that is more complicated than simple invasion and resistance. There is a final machine-related Easter egg in this chapter that sits slightly apart from the lore-focused discoveries and belongs more to the developer signature category. On the dorsal surface of one of the mid-size Arc Machine types, in a location that is only clearly visible when the machine has been destroyed and is lying on its back, there are a series of tiny etched initials arranged in a line. The initials are too small to read without zooming in on high-resolution screenshots. But once zoomed, they're clearly there, a row of 2-letter pairs spaced evenly across a structural rib on the machine's back. The initials are widely believed to be the signatures of members of the Embark Studios development team, or at least a subset of them, hidden on the underside of a machine you would only ever see this side of if you had already killed it. The tradition of developers hiding their names inside games goes back decades, and it has a warm quality to it, even in a game about machine invaders. The fact that Embark chose to hide the initials on the back of a destroyed machine, a surface you only see in the aftermath of a fight, is either a coincidence or a small statement about the relationship between creation and destruction. You had to kill the thing to find the names of the people who made it. Whether that reading is too much or exactly right is the kind of interpretive question this type of Easter egg always raises. Arc Machine design, as a whole, rewards extended attention in ways that most combat games do not. The usual approach to designing enemies prioritizes visual clarity, readable silhouettes, understandable attack telegraphs. Arc Raiders does all of that at the functional level. But it also does something underneath the function, building a layer of detail into the machines that is not for combat purposes at all. It is for the players who will, after hundreds of hours, stop shooting and start reading. Those players will find the codes, the symbol, the initials, the scratched mark, and the processed voice fragments. And each one of those things will change, slightly, the way the game world feels. Not dramatically, not with a cutscene or a fanfare, just a small, quiet shift in understanding. The machines were not born in space, or at least that is what the evidence suggests. They were made, or designed, or at least influenced by something human, something that left its mark in the code and the chassis and the sounds they broadcast while scanning empty zones at night. Whatever that origin was, it was important enough to hide in the details. And hiding it in the details, rather than saying it out loud, is the most honest way to handle a truth that complicated. Chapter 3. The Bunker Archives. Below the surface, below the ruins and the craters and the Arc Patrol routes, there are bunkers. This is not a secret. Bunkers are functional spaces in the game, places where players take shelter, find resources, manage their loadouts. Most players spend a significant portion of any given session inside some version of a bunker interior. But the bunkers contain more than loot tables and crafting stations. They contain archives, physical and digital, of a world that existed before the machines came. And those archives are where some of the most complex and emotionally resonant Easter eggs in Arc Raiders live. The bunker archive content divides roughly into three categories. First, there are physical documents, papers, notebooks, printed files that appear as props in the environment. Second, there are digital terminals, non-functional computer setups whose screens sometimes display frozen text or imagery. Third, there are the personal objects, photographs, drawings, small memorabilia that fill out the human detail of the spaces. Each category has hidden content embedded within it, and the connections between categories, a document referencing a photograph, referencing a terminal readout, make the bunker archives their own self-contained Easter egg ecosystem. Starting with the physical documents, the most significant discovery in this category is a set of what appear to be mission briefing pages found across multiple bunker locations. Each page is formatted the same way: a header block, a numbered body, a signature line at the bottom. The header blocks are redacted, black bars covering whatever institutional identification was there. The body text is not fully redacted, but uses enough technical jargon and abbreviation that the meaning is not immediately clear on first read. The signature lines are blank. These pages look like classified documents from before the invasion, sanitized and distributed to bunker staff for some operational purpose. The contents of the briefing pages, read across all found instances, describe a monitoring operation. Someone was tracking something in the months before the invasion, something described variously in the pages as an anomalous transmission source, a non-standard orbital signature, and, in one page's body text, a candidate arrival vector. This language is not military in the conventional sense. It reads like scientific monitoring documentation, the kind of briefing that would go out to listening posts or research stations, not to combat units. The people who received these pages were researchers or technical personnel, not soldiers. The candidate arrival vector language in that one page is particularly notable because it implies directional prediction, not just detection of an anomaly, but modelling of where it was going to come from. Someone, in the months before the invasion, built a predictive model of the Ark arrival and was distributing that prediction to personnel in the field. The model was specific enough to generate a vector, a trajectory. The machines came from a direction that was, to at least one group of people, anticipated. This connects back to the signal trail from the first chapter, but expands it considerably. We are no longer talking about one person with a receiver in a safe house. We are talking about an organised operation with briefing documents and field personnel. The digital terminals add a different layer to the bunker archive story. Most of them are non-functional, displaying static or error states that read as generic atmospheric detail. But a small subset have screens that display something specific rather than generic noise. The most famous example is a terminal in a mid-game bunker whose screen shows a login interface frozen at the moment of attempted access. The username field is filled in with a string that, while it reads like a system username, contains within it a name that appears elsewhere in the bunker's physical document set, a first name, partially matching a signature fragment visible on one of the briefing pages. The frozen login is a small thing on its own. Someone tried to access a terminal and was cut off, presumably by the invasion disrupting power or network access. But the username connection to the briefing pages suggests that the person who tried to log in was the same person who received or sent the briefing documents. This is not just a random bunker worker. This is someone involved in the monitoring operation. And the fact that they were attempting to access this particular terminal at the moment everything went wrong, that their last digital act was trying to get into a system in a field bunker, suggests they were trying to do something with the information they had. Upload it, access it, share it, something that the invasion interrupted. The personal objects in the bunkers receive less analytical attention than the documents and terminals, partly because their meaning is harder to formalize, and partly because people tend to treat them as atmosphere rather than information. But the Easter eggs in this category are in some ways the most emotionally precise in the game. There is a child's drawing found in a specific bunker that depicts what a child would draw if they were drawing machines descending from the sky. Rough circles at the top, lines coming down, smaller figures below. It looks like a drawing of the invasion, and in the corner of the drawing, in a child's handwriting, a date. The date is before the invasion, weeks before. The drawing depicts something that had not happened yet. A child drew the Ark invasion before it occurred. This could be written off as a retroactive association. The drawing might depict something else that happens to resemble the invasion in hindsight, but the date rules that out. The date is specific and clearly legible, and it falls in the window identified by the signal trail and the briefing documents as the period of monitored pre-invasion activity. The child who drew this was somewhere near people who were paying attention to the sky, whether they overheard something, whether they somehow perceived something on their own, whether someone showed them something they should not have been shown. The drawing exists and the date is what it is. The child's drawing has a companion piece that was found much later, in a different bunker, in a different zone. A second drawing, same general artistic style, same rough depiction of descending objects. No date this time, but with something the first drawing does not have. On the back of the second drawing, written in adult handwriting, a single sentence. The sentence is partially obscured by water damage to the texture, but the visible portion reads as an instruction or warning. The legible words include the concept of going somewhere, the word underground or below, and what appears to be a specific time reference. Someone wrote directions on the back of a child's drawing. Whether the child followed them, whether both the child and the adult who wrote the note survived, the archive does not say. The two drawings together are one of the most discussed environmental stories in Ark Raider's hidden content. They do not tell you a complete narrative. They give you a before drawing and an after note, with everything that happened in between left to inference. The before drawing shows someone who knew. The after note shows someone who was trying to act on that knowledge and protect a child. The bunker you find the second drawing in is a functional stocked facility, suggesting whoever built it had preparation time. Whether the people who built it and drew in it are still somewhere in that world, underground and surviving, is left open. The game does not close that loop. Adjacent to the child's drawings in the emotional register is a small collection of photographs found scattered across several bunker locations that appear to depict the same group of people across different time periods. The photographs are non-interactive environment props, not items you pick up, just framed or pinned images in the background of bunker interior dressing. But when you catalogue them and compare the faces, there is a consistent cast of characters visible across what appears to be a timeline spanning several years. The earliest photographs show a small group of people in what looks like a research or technical environment, working, casual, not staged. The later photographs show the same people in less structured settings, outdoor contexts, some with visible wear and stress in their expressions. Tracking this photo series requires visiting multiple bunker locations and comparing reference images, which is not something most players have reason to do. But those who have assembled a complete collection report a progression that ends with a photograph, the most recent in the apparent timeline, that shows only some of the original group. Several faces from the early photographs are absent from the late ones. The remaining people do not look casual anymore. They look like people who have been through something. The photograph is not dated. The location it depicts is not identifiable from the image alone, but it is the endpoint of a years-long visual story told entirely through background props in rooms where most players are looking at loot crates. The bunker archive Easter eggs function differently from the signal trail or the machine code discoveries, in that they are specifically human-scale stories. The signal trail is about information and foreknowledge at an operational level. The machine codes are about systems and origins at a technical level. The bunker archives are about individual people, their drawings and photographs, uninterrupted logins, and redacted briefing pages. They bring the scale down from civilizational to personal. They say that among all the macro-scale disaster of the Ark invasion, there were specific children who drew specific pictures, specific people who wrote specific notes, specific researchers who tried to log into specific terminals in the last hours before everything changed. The deliberate fragmentation of these personal stories across multiple bunker locations, requiring players to travel, collect, and compare, is one of the most interesting structural choices in the game's hidden content design. No single bunker gives you the complete picture. The child's drawing is in one place, the companion note is in another zone entirely. The photo series spans at least 4 distinct bunker interiors. The briefing pages and the terminal login are in yet another location. You have to move through the world to read the story, which means the story's geography mirrors the experience of living in it. In the post-invasion world of Ark Raiders, knowledge is distributed and incomplete, held by survivors who are scattered and separated. The Easter eggs work the same way. There are more bunker archive discoveries to cover, but several of them connect directly to later chapters. Specifically, the recurring symbols chapter and the faction secrets chapter. So we will pick up those threads when we reach them. For now, the key takeaway from the bunker archives as a whole is that they document, in fragmentary form, the period of transition between the world before and the world after. The people in these archives knew. They prepared. Some of them had children, some of them had photographs, some of them had briefing documents with redacted headers and blank signature lines. They were real in the small specific ways that matter, and the Ark machines came anyway. Chapter 4. Names in the Noise. Every game has them somewhere, the small signatures developers leave behind in the code or the content to mark their work as their own. Ark Raiders has more of these than most games, and more of them are genuinely hidden than is typical. Embark Studios does not seem content to put developer names in an obvious credits Easter egg room or an easily found texture. They hide them specifically and thoughtfully in places that require the same kind of extended attention that the lore Easter eggs demand. The result is a layer of content that blurs the line between developer tribute and world building, because in many cases the names have been integrated into the environment in ways that feel like they belong there rather than being grafted on. The most famous developer signature Easter egg in Ark Raiders is found on the inside of a specific piece of equipment in one of the game's primary indoor environments. The equipment in question is a large piece of pre-invasion machinery, the kind of prop that fills industrial spaces throughout the game, heavy and functional looking in design, on the interior of one of its access hatches, visible only if you manage to position the camera precisely during a brief animation window. When the hatch texture loads at close range, there is a small panel. The panel has a maintenance log format, the kind of template you would find on real-world industrial equipment. In the slots meant for maintenance technician names, there are real names, not fictional character names, first names that correspond to first names on the publicly available Embark Studios developer lists. The maintenance log format was a clever choice because it gives the names a diegetic reason to exist within the game world. Real industrial equipment has maintenance logs signed by real technicians. The game contains a prop industrial machine that has been maintained apparently by the developers who built it. The log entries include not just names but service dates, and those dates, while fictional and set before the in-game invasion timeline, follow a plausible maintenance schedule for the type of equipment depicted. This is not just initials scratched on a surface. This is a fully formatted Easter egg that takes its setting seriously. A second cluster of developer signatures is found in the texture work on a specific section of exterior wall in one of the game zones. The wall has a complex surface treatment, layers of paint, graffiti, wear marks, all overlapping in the way that real-world exterior walls accumulate history. Within this texture, visible at high zoom and in good light conditions, there is a layer of text that sits beneath the uppermost paint layer but above the bare surface. It is readable through the painted over layer, the same way old graffiti sometimes shows through whitewash in real buildings. The text in this layer is a list of names, formatted like a roster. The names on the roster include several that match known Embark developers, mixed with names that are clearly fictional. The mixing of real and fictional names on the roster is interesting because it means the Easter egg is not a straightforward developer tribute. It is a tribute that has been woven into the world. The fictional names on the roster are not arbitrary. Some of them appear elsewhere in the game, in document props or on other surfaces, as part of the environmental storytelling. The real names of developers have been placed alongside fictional names that are actually characters in the world. It suggests the developers saw themselves as part of the world they were building, signed into the same roster as the fictional people who lived in it. Moving to the sonic equivalent of developer signatures, the game's ambient audio tracks contain a handful of what appear to be deliberately embedded tonal signatures. These are not speech fragments like the ones found in Arc Machine Idle audio. They are musical, brief melodic figures that appear in the background audio of specific locations. The figures are too short and too buried in the mix to be noticed on first or even 10th visit to a location. They become apparent only when the ambient audio is isolated and analysed. When extracted and examined, several of them are recognisable as variations on themes from other Embark Studios projects. Most prominently, The Finals, the other game in Embark's current portfolio. The cross-game tonal signatures are the closest thing Arc Raiders has to a shared universe acknowledgement in official content. The games are otherwise unconnected in their narrative settings, but the audio DNA they share suggests a developer culture where themes and motifs are carried between projects as signatures. The specific figures embedded in Arc Raiders' ambient audio are subtle enough to be deniable as deliberate references. They could be generic musical patterns that happen to sound like related material. But the community's reaction to these findings was sharp and immediate, particularly among players who had deep familiarity with the Finals audio design. And the consensus among that group was that the similarities are too specific to be coincidental. One developer signature Easter egg stands somewhat apart from the others because of its scale and the commitment required to find it. Scattered across the outdoor zones of the game are a series of environmental light sources, ambient light emitters built into structures or natural features that appear to have no functional purpose. They do not illuminate any particular area of gameplay interest. They are simply lights in places where lights exist, but their positions on the map, when plotted on a bird's eye grid, form a pattern. The pattern is large enough to span a significant portion of a zone's navigable space. When the pattern is viewed as a whole, it spells out, in a stylized but legible arrangement, a short word or initialism. Determining exactly what the light pattern spells has been a point of debate in the community. The lights require significant travel to document in a single session, and the mapping of their positions is subject to the imprecision of in-game coordinate systems. Two competing interpretations of the pattern exist, one reading it as the first letters of several developer names in a specific arrangement, and another reading it as a reference to a phrase used internally at Embark Studios that was mentioned in an offhand way in a developer livestream from early in the game's development. Both readings are plausible, given the available data. Neither has been confirmed. The mystery of what the light pattern says is, appropriately, its own Easter egg. Developer signatures in games carry a tradition that predates modern development practices significantly. In the very early days of game development, programmers hid their names in software as a form of credit that publishers sometimes tried to suppress, and finding those signatures became a form of connection between the developer and the player who cared enough to look. Ark Raiders revives that tradition, but extends it into the environmental design in a way that feels native to the game's overall aesthetic rather than grafted on from outside. The names are in the world, they belong there. The people who built this environment left their mark in it, in the maintenance log, and the paint layers, and the ambient audio, and the light positions. And the players who find those marks are doing something that feels less like discovering an Easter egg, and more like reading graffiti left by a friend. There is one more developer signature discovery worth discussing here, partly because it is the most recent major finding in this category, and partly because it connects, in an unexpected way, to the lore content from earlier chapters. In a specific bunker interior, in the same general zone as the photo series we discussed, there is a piece of computer equipment whose physical casing has a sticker on it. The sticker is a standard prop element, the kind of thing that clutters real-world tech hardware, warning labels, asset tags, calibration stickers. But this particular sticker has a logo on it. The logo is a small stylized graphic that does not match any in-world institution or faction identified elsewhere in the game. It matches, however, with a modified version of the Embark Studios wordmark, their real-world company identity, with the letter forms rearranged and simplified to the point where it reads as a plausible in-world logo while still being recognizable as a signature to anyone who knows what they are looking for. The Embark logo sticker on the bunker equipment is the developer signature Easter egg that most explicitly connects the real world to the game world. It places the studio in a transformed but identifiable form into the pre-invasion environment of the game. If the bunkers were built by or associated with the institution carrying the transformed Embark logo, then the game is, at one layer of reading, a story about what happens to the world that Embark built. The Ark machines are not the only invaders in that reading. The real world invades the fiction through the sticker on the hardware, and the boundary between who made the world and who lived in it blurs accordingly. Chapter 5. The frequencies. The audio environment of Ark Raiders is one of the most carefully designed elements of the entire game. Sound design in extraction shooters carries enormous functional weight. Players listen for enemy approaches, for danger cues, for the specific sonic signatures that tell them what is happening at the edge of their visibility. Embark Studios built a sound environment for Ark Raiders that serves all of those functional purposes with precision. But embedded within that functional audio design is a secondary layer that has nothing to do with gameplay information and everything to do with world building and hidden content. The frequencies that do not help you survive are the ones that tell you the most about where you are. The foundational discovery in Ark Raiders audio Easter eggs is the existence of what the community has named the background loop. In multiple outdoor locations across the game's zones, at specific times of day in the in-game cycle, there is an audio element audible in the ambient mix that is not present at other times or in other locations. The element is quiet, layered beneath wind and environmental tone, and it took a long time before anyone isolated it clearly enough to describe it. When isolated, it sounds like a radio broadcast, not music, not a voice. The structural pattern of a radio transmission. Carrier wave modulations, the kind of audio artifact you hear when a broadcast signal is not quite fully decoded by a receiver. Something is broadcasting, and the ambient audio of specific outdoor locations catches it faintly. The background loop was first identified when a player recording extended atmospheric footage for content creation purposes noticed in post-production that their audio track had a consistent underlayer that they could not identify as any of the known ambient audio elements. They took the isolated track to several people with signal processing backgrounds, and the consensus was that it had the spectral characteristics of a modulated transmission, specifically a type of modulation used in certain real-world narrowband communication systems. Not music, not standard voice radio, a specific technical transmission type that carries information in encoded form. Attempts to decode the background loop as a real transmission, applying actual demodulation techniques to the audio, have produced ambiguous results. The game audio is not a real radio signal, it is a designed imitation of one, and the imitation does not have enough fidelity to decode the way a real signal would, but the attempts have not been entirely unproductive. Several of the demodulation approaches applied to the loop have produced output that contains recognizable structural elements, patterns of variation that are consistent with encoded data rather than random noise. Whether those patterns carry meaningful information or are an artifact of the processing is not resolved. But the structural consistency is real. The geographic distribution of the background loop is one of its most interesting properties. It is not present everywhere. It appears in specific outdoor locations, always at the same time in the in-game cycle, always at roughly the same audio level relative to the ambient mix. The locations where it appears are not randomly distributed. When they are mapped, they form a loose corridor across the terrain, a path that connects several key navigational landmarks. The corridor is not a straight line. It curves, follows terrain features, avoids certain zones entirely. It looks less like a broadcast coverage pattern and more like a waypointed route, a series of locations where the signal is strongest, as if someone designed the distribution to guide a listener from one point to the next. If the background loop is a designed breadcrumb trail, it leads from the outer edges of the central zone toward the interior, specifically toward the crater we identified in the first chapter as an arc landing site and an anchor in the signal trail. The loop is strongest in the locations closest to the crater and weakest or absent in the locations furthest from it. This inverse distance pattern is consistent with a real broadcast emanating from a source near the crater, or at least with a designed audio environment that simulates one. Whether the crater contains a broadcast source as part of its hidden content, whether there is something buried there that is still transmitting, is a question that has not yet been answered by any confirmed discovery. Setting aside the background loop and looking at more conventional audio Easter eggs, the game contains several hidden sound files that play only under specific and unusual conditions. The most documented of these is a piece of music that plays in a specific bunker interior when a precise sequence of non-obvious interactions is performed on the room's prop objects. The sequence was discovered accidentally by a player who was testing object interaction physics and triggered the audio without understanding what had caused it. Reconstructing the sequence took communal effort over several sessions. When the trigger was established and the audio was reliably playable, it turned out to be a fully produced piece of music. Not ambient, not background, a melodic composition of about 40 seconds that plays once and does not repeat. The music piece is beautiful, which is an odd word to use about an Easter egg, but is the one the community most consistently applies to it. It has a quality that is different from the game's functional audio, more personal, and more deliberately affecting. Whether it was composed specifically as a hidden secret, or whether it is a piece of music that exists somewhere in Embark's library and was placed here as a tribute or signature, is not known. But the 40 seconds of it that play in that bunker interior when you perform the right sequence of interactions have a weight to them that feels intentional, like the musical equivalent of a message in a bottle. The interactive trigger for the bunker music is itself interesting as a design object. It requires interacting with several environmental props in a specific order, objects that have no gameplay function and that a player would only interact with out of curiosity or systematic exploration. The sequence is not intuitive, it does not follow a logical narrative path. It is the kind of thing you would only find by either exhaustive systematic testing or lucky accident. This is a design choice that makes the Easter egg genuinely secret rather than hidden but guessable. You cannot solve your way to it, you have to find it. In addition to the bunker music, There are several audio details in the game that function as oblique references to other media. One of the most clearly identifiable is a piece of ambient audio in a specific outdoor ruin that, when looped and listened to carefully, contains a structural similarity to a well-known piece of science fiction film scoring from several decades ago. The similarity is not a direct quote or sample. The notes and rhythms are different enough to avoid being a direct reproduction. But the compositional approach, the specific way the instrumentation layers and the tonal center shifts, is distinctive enough that players with musical backgrounds have consistently identified the reference. It is a homage, not a copy, and it is buried deep enough in the mix that it functions as a secret between the composers and the listeners careful enough to hear it. The question of what the audio Easter eggs in aggregate are trying to say or do is a different kind of question than the one we ask about the lore Easter eggs. The lore discoveries have a direction to them. They are building something, adding to a picture, pointing toward answers, or deepening questions about the world's history. The audio Easter eggs do not build in the same cumulative way. They are more like small gifts, the music piece in the bunker, the reference in the ambient scoring, the background loop that may be a trail or may just be texture. They are the sound design team's way of saying they were here too, that behind the functional audio that helps you play the game, there are people who cared about sound as an art and left some of that art in places that most players will never find. The background loop, as we close this chapter, remains the most open and intriguing audio mystery in the game. Its geographic distribution, its temporal consistency, its structural characteristics when analysed, all of these properties suggest it was designed with purpose. The corridor it traces across the terrain points toward the crater. The crater is already connected through the signal trail to the pre-invasion monitoring operation and to the human institution symbol found on Arc machine chassis. Everything in this game seems to move toward the crater eventually, and the audio layer is no exception. Whatever is at the centre of the hidden narrative, whatever Embark Studios was thinking about when they built this world and its secrets, the crater is where it lives. Chapter 6. Recurring symbols and what they might mean. Every game world with serious lore investment develops a visual vocabulary, a set of shapes and symbols that recur across environments and carry meaning within the world's logic. Arc Raiders has this, both in its surface design and in its hidden layer. The symbols that appear in the overt design, the factional iconography, the Arc machine aesthetic vocabulary, are visible and documented. But beneath the surface design, there is a second symbolic vocabulary, a set of marks and shapes that do not appear in any official faction branding or machine aesthetics, but that show up consistently across multiple environments and contexts. These are the recurring symbols of the hidden layer, and what they might mean is one of the most openly contested questions in the Arc Raiders research community. The most frequently spotted hidden symbol is one we have already encountered in the signal trail. Chapter, the waveform mark that appears on the relay tower and in several other locations. By this point in the video, we know it is connected to the pre-invasion transmission. But looking at the full range of locations where the waveform appears, beyond the signal trail anchor points, reveals a wider distribution than the trail alone accounts for. The waveform is not only at places connected to the monitoring operation, it appears in locations with no obvious connection to the signal story, places where the presence of the mark suggests either a second meaning or a secondary user community for the symbol. The three locations where the waveform appears outside of the signal trail are all in heavily damaged areas of the game world, zones where the Arc invasion has been most destructive. The buildings in these zones are compromised to the point where most of their interior detailing is inaccessible, but the exterior walls that remain standing carry the waveform mark, in each case scratched rather than printed, suggesting it was applied after the original industrial context of the location was destroyed. Someone was moving through the ruined zones, and marking specific walls with the waveform symbol after the invasion had made those zones dangerous. This is a different story from the pre-invasion monitoring station context. This is someone in the post-invasion world using a pre-invasion symbol for a purpose specific to the new reality. The scratched post-invasion waveform marks are always found at roughly the same height as the pre-invasion printed ones, chest height. This could mean they were all made by the same person. It could mean the symbol has a community of users who all learn to mark it at the same height. It could mean height consistency is a feature of the symbol itself, a rule about how it should be placed that is part of whatever meaning it carries. Any of these readings changes the implications of the symbol's presence. If it is one person moving through both pre-invasion facilities and post-invasion ruins, we are tracking a specific individual across the game world's geography and timeline. If it is a community, the symbol is a language shared between survivors. The second most documented recurring hidden symbol is the 3 triangles in a row that we encountered on the Arc machine leg in the machine chapter. The triangle row appears in non-machine contexts as well, specifically in 3 bunker interiors spread across different zones. In each bunker, the triangle row is found on a different surface type, once painted on a wall, once carved into a wooden surface, once stamped on a metal plate. The surfaces and execution styles differ, but the symbol is consistent. 3 small equilateral triangles, touching or nearly touching, arranged horizontally. No additional markings accompanying it. No text or explanation. The triangle row on the Arc machine leg was read as a possible tag made by a human marking machines in the field. The triangle row in bunker interiors reads as a different application of the same symbol. If humans are marking both Arc machines and safehouse environments with the same symbol, the symbol is either a personal identifier carried into all contexts by one individual, or it is a symbol used by a faction or group that operates in multiple contexts. The bunker locations where it appears are not affiliated with any explicitly named faction in the game's surface lore. This leaves the triangle row as either an unaffiliated survivor community's mark or an as-yet unnamed faction's identifier. The third recurring hidden symbol is the most abstract and the most difficult to describe without visual reference. It is a circular form with an asymmetric interior division, a circle split not in half but in a way that creates a larger and smaller section, roughly 2/3 and 1/3. The split line is not a diameter, it is slightly curved. The symbol appears in 4 confirmed locations in the game, in each case as a small mark on a surface that is otherwise unremarkable. Its appearances do not form an obvious geographic corridor the way the waveform locations do. They are distributed in a pattern that suggests proximity to specific building types, rather than proximity to geographic landmarks. The building types near the asymmetric circle symbol appearances are all structures that, based on their architectural style and equipment, appear to predate the more recent construction visible elsewhere in the game world. They are older buildings, their design language suggesting they were built decades before the invasion, rather than in the period immediately preceding it. This temporal association suggests the asymmetric circle might be an older symbol, one that was in use long before the Arc threat existed, and whose reappearance in the game's current timeline is a callback to something in the world's deeper history. Whether that deeper history is part of the human institution backstory that the machine chassis symbol hints at is speculative, but the connection is one that several researchers have flagged as worth pursuing. A fourth recurring symbol, less documented than the 3 above, but increasingly discussed as more examples are found, is a pair of parallel vertical lines with a small horizontal crossbar at the top. This symbol appears to be associated specifically with doorways and threshold spaces, appearing adjacent to or framing entrances in contexts where the other recurring symbols appear on flat open surfaces. Its specific association with thresholds has led some community members to interpret it as a marker for safe passage, a symbol that means either this way or it is safe to enter. Others have pointed out that in several real-world symbolic traditions, similar forms carry connotations of boundary or transition. Whether Ark Raiders is drawing on any real-world symbolic tradition or building its own is not clear, but the threshold placement is too consistent to be accidental. Taking the 4 recurring hidden symbols together, what you have is a visual language that operates below the surface of the game's official design. The language is not complete. There are probably more symbols to find that would clarify what the existing ones mean in relation to each other. But the properties already established, waveform for something related to signal and foreknowledge, triangle row for a specific community or individual, asymmetric circle for something old and institutional, parallel lines for threshold and passage, suggest a working lexicon. Someone in the game world, or a community of someone's, is communicating in a language that the surface law does not acknowledge. The most significant implication of the recurring symbol language being real and coherent is what it says about the human element of the post-invasion world. The game's surface narrative presents survivors as isolated, fragmented, getting by. But a shared symbolic language requires communication to spread and maintain. Symbols do not stay consistent across multiple zones and building types by accident. If the triangle row means the same thing on an Ark machine leg as it does on a bunker wall, someone is maintaining the meaning of that symbol across a distributed community of users. There is a level of social organization implied by a stable symbol language that the game does not explicitly depict but that the hidden layer argues for. The symbol research in Ark Raiders is one of the areas of hidden content study with the most active ongoing work. New symbol instances are documented regularly as more players engage with the detailed environmental survey approach. The current 4-symbol vocabulary may expand significantly as more examples accumulate. What remains consistent in all findings so far is the relationship between symbol placement and significance of location. The marks appear at places that matter in other Easter egg chains, at signal trail anchors, at bunker archive sites, at machine encounter locations with coded units. The symbols are not random graffiti. They are a map, or at least a marking system. What they are mapping and for whose benefit are the questions this chapter leaves open. Chapter 7. The photographs. Photographs function in Ark Raiders' environmental storytelling as one of the most direct forms of human evidence. Where documents and symbols require interpretation and decoding, photographs simply show. They depict faces, places, moments. They carry the weight of specific people having been somewhere specific at a specific time. The game's photograph props are distributed across bunker interiors, ruins, and occasionally outdoor spaces, and while most of them are unremarkable background items, a subset form part of a coherent, hidden narrative. That is, in the opinion of many who have traced it, the most emotionally complete Easter egg story in the game. We touched on the recurring photograph series in the Bunker Archives chapter. A consistent cast of faces appearing in images distributed across multiple locations, showing a progression from calm professional life to something harder and more worn. This section extends that discussion by mapping the complete photo series and examining what the sequence implies. The total count of photographs in the series, as of the most recent comprehensive documentation effort, is 11 images. Not all of them are in bunker locations. 2 are in outdoor ruins. 1 is in a location that required significant exploration effort to access, a partially hidden room behind a displaced wall panel in an industrial facility. The chronology of the photo series is inferred from contextual details rather than stated directly. The images are not dated, but they carry internal evidence, clothing styles, equipment visible in backgrounds, the relative youth or age of the subjects, the seasons visible through windows or in outdoor shots. Cross-referencing these details allows a rough ordering from earliest to latest, and the story that ordering tells begins with a group of approximately 8 people working together in a professional context and ends, in the final image, with 2 people standing in a space that looks post-invasion among ruins, with arc damage visible in the background behind them. The professional context of the early photographs is the most significant detail for connecting the photo series to the broader hidden narrative. The equipment visible in the background of the earliest images includes items that, when compared to other photograph and document props in the game, appear similar to the kind of monitoring and communications equipment referenced in the bunker briefing documents. The people in the early photographs appear to be researchers or technical specialists, the same category of personnel identified in the briefing documents. If the photo series depicts the same group of people described in the monitoring operation documentation, then the photographs are not just emotional, environmental storytelling. They are the faces of the operation itself. The attrition visible in the series, the progressive disappearance of faces from the group, follows a pattern that is more unsettling for being gradual. The group does not drop from 8 to 2 in a single step. It reduces by 1 or 2 faces at each photographic interval, as if the images were taken at regular intervals over a period of time, during which the group steadily lost members. The context of each image does not explain the losses. There are no dramatic scenes, no images of injury or danger, just the group, slightly smaller each time, in spaces that grow progressively more improvised and less professionally maintained. The story of what happened to the missing faces is entirely implied. One detail in the 5th image of the series by the inferred chronological ordering has been the subject of particular discussion. In the background of the image, partially visible over the shoulder of one of the subjects, there is a wall with markings on it. The markings are not immediately identifiable from the photograph's resolution and angle, but community members who enhanced and analysed the image were able to determine that the markings include the waveform symbol from the signal trail. This places the photograph setting in a location connected to the monitoring operations symbol usage. The people in the photographs and the people who mark the walls with the waveform are the same people or are in the same location. The final 2 images in the series are qualitatively different from the earlier ones. The earlier photographs have the texture of images taken casually or professionally, with composition suggesting either a camera on a tripod or someone comfortable behind a lens. The final 2 look like they were taken quickly, opportunistically, at close range. The subjects are not posed, the framing is imprecise. These look like photographs taken in a moment of urgency, or at least informality, someone raising a camera quickly to capture something before it was too late. What it was too late for, whether this was a goodbye documentation or a survival record or something else, is not explained by the images themselves. Of the 2 people visible in the final photograph, one has appeared consistently throughout the series. This person, who community researchers refer to by a nickname derived from a detail in their appearance, is the constant in the photo series, present in every image from first to last. They are the anchor of the group over its entire documented timeline. Seeing them in the final image, standing in a ruined space still present when everyone else is gone, carries a narrative weight that the game never explicitly draws attention to, but that is fully legible to anyone who has assembled the complete series. They survived. The others did not. And someone took a picture of it. The location of the final photograph has been a subject of active investigation. The ruined space visible in the background has architectural features that are distinctive enough for comparison work, and several players have made cases for specific in-game locations matching what is visible in the image. The most credible match identified so far is a partially accessible area of the game's most heavily damaged zone, a location that has not yielded any other confirmed Easter egg content on its own, but that, if the photograph match is correct, would give the constant presence individual a physical location in the game world that a player could actually visit. As of now, no definitive confirmation has established the match beyond reasonable doubt, but the candidate location is one that more players are visiting and documenting with increased attention. The photo series as an Easter egg is unusual in the genre because it does not decode to information. It is not a puzzle with an answer. The photographs do not reveal coordinates or unlock content or point toward a new discovery. They exist as a story, complete in the limited sense that it has a beginning and something that functions as an ending, but without resolution of the questions it raises. Who were these people? What happened to the missing members? Where did the two survivors go after the final photograph? The game knows the answers to these questions because someone at Embark assembled the story, but it chose to give you the photographs and not the answers. That choice to give the story without the resolution is a statement about the world of Ark Raiders, as much as it is a design decision. The world the game depicts is full of incomplete stories. The briefing documents are redacted. The calendar has a circled date and no note about what happened on it. The child's drawing has a companion note with instructions for going somewhere, but no subsequent evidence of arrival. Across the entire hidden content layer of the game, the pattern is of stories without endings. Not unfinished stories in the sense of being incomplete as design work, but stories whose endings happened off-screen, in the spaces between the evidence, in the parts of the world you cannot see because the game ends where the machines are and the people went below ground or stayed too long above it. The photographs are the most human-scale version of this pattern, and they work because photographs are the thing that human beings use to prove they were here. They are the universal language of existence documentation. Everyone who has ever mattered to anyone has photographs somewhere. Ark Raiders put photographs in the world and let them tell their stories silently from background walls and ruined shelves, and the people who stopped to look at them found not Easter eggs in the treasure hunt sense, but something closer to the feeling of finding someone else's photographs in an old house, and understanding, without knowing the names, that these were real lives. Chapter 8. When another game crashes the party. Ark Raiders shares its development lineage with the Finals, the other game in Embark Studios' current portfolio. Both games came from the same studio, built partly by the same teams, and released within a short time of each other in the broader context of Embark's emergence as an independent studio. Given this shared origin, it is perhaps not surprising that Ark Raiders contains references to the Finals and vice versa. What is interesting is how these references are handled, with a specificity and subtlety that suggests they were placed by people who knew exactly what they were hiding and enjoyed the idea of it being found. The most clearly identified The Finals reference in Ark Raiders is a piece of environmental prop design in one of the game's urban ruin sections. The section in question is a collapsed commercial building, and among the debris on the ground, there is a broken sign. The sign, when the non-broken version is reconstructed from the visible fragments, depicts a logo that is an altered version of a brand seen in the Finals. The alteration is thorough enough that it reads as a plausible, in-world commercial brand for Ark Raiders' setting, rather than a direct transplant from the Finals. But the specific shape of the letterforms and the colour treatment of the logo, even in its damaged and reconstructed form, are distinctive enough that players familiar with both games consistently identify the reference. Beyond the logo fragment, there are audio references to the Finals embedded in Ark Raiders' sound design that we touched on in the Frequencies chapter. The tonal signatures in the ambient audio, the brief melodic figures that echo the Finals' compositional style, serve as an audio equivalent of the broken sign, a wink between the two games' design teams that is only visible to players with knowledge of both. The audio connection and the visual connection together suggest this cross-game reference was deliberate policy rather than accident, that Embark has an approach to their games existing in the same creative space, even if not the same fictional universe. Outside of the finals, Arc Raiders contains references to a wider range of games and media, some clear and some deeply buried. The clearest non-Embark reference is a piece of environmental prop in a specific zone that depicts, in a sufficiently transformed but still recognizable form, an item strongly associated with a major science fiction video game franchise. The item appears in a display case as part of an environmental detail suggesting this location was a collector's space or museum before the invasion. The transformation of the reference item is careful. The shape and proportions have been altered enough that it could be a coincidence or an in-world equivalent, but the specific combination of design choices pushes it firmly into deliberate homage territory for anyone who knows the source. There is also a music reference embedded in one of the game's outdoor environment audio tracks that points toward a classic science fiction film. We discussed it in the Frequencies chapter as an example of compositional homage, but the specific film it references is worth naming conceptually as context for how the reference functions. The film in question is one whose audio design has been enormously influential on the science fiction genre, and the compositional approach being echoed in Arc Raiders' ambient audio is specifically the technique that film uses for its most desolate and vast-feeling scenes. Arc Raiders is invoking a specific emotional register from a specific cinematic tradition, and the players who pick it up feel the connection even before they consciously identify the source. One category of cross-reference that the community has been particularly interested in is potential references to Battlefield, DICE's long-running military shooter franchise, given that several key members of Embark Studios came from DICE. The expectation was that ex-DICE developers would leave DICE-specific signatures somewhere in their new work. Several candidate discoveries have been proposed, including a specific vehicle prop, whose design shows structural similarities to vehicles from Battlefield titles, and an audio element whose processing approach echoes techniques used in specific Battlefield games' environmental sound design. Neither of these has achieved consensus as a confirmed reference, because in both cases the similarities are architectural enough to be explained by shared design vocabulary from the military and industrial simulation space. But the discussion itself is interesting as a window into how community cross-referencing works. A reference that is more confidently identified, though not from a game, is a visual detail in the interior design of one of the older bunker types that appears to nod towards specific science fiction visual aesthetic from a well-known franchise in that medium. The aesthetic in question is distinctive enough that its elements, specific color palette combinations, specific interface design language, are recognizable across a wide audience. Their appearance in Arc Raiders' bunker design is subtle, worked into the overall visual language rather than dropped in as obvious pastiche, but they are there in a way that feels deliberate. This category of reference, design language homage, rather than direct object or quote reference, is arguably the most sophisticated form of Easter egg because it requires the deepest literacy in both the source material and the game to detect and appreciate. The cross-reference and homage layer of Arc Raiders is lighter in overall presence than the lore-focused hidden content. It does not build a cumulative story the way the Signal Trail or the Photograph series does. Each reference exists more or less independently, a nod to something external rather than a contribution to an internal mystery. But together these references build a picture of the development culture at Embark Studios, a community of people who grew up with science fiction games and films and carry that history into their work, who see themselves in conversation with those predecessors and are not shy about writing that conversation into the walls of their world. That is a different kind of Easter egg than the ones we have spent most of this video examining, and it is worth sitting with for a moment before moving on. Chapter 9. The people who are here. There is a category of hidden content in Ark Raiders that does not fit cleanly into any of the earlier chapter frameworks. It is not lore building in the signal trail sense. It is not a developer signature. It is not a mechanical Easter egg or an audio discovery. It is a category that might be called presence evidence, the small specific signs that particular human beings lived in specific spaces in the time before and immediately after the Ark invasion. Not organised evidence like the photo series or the monitoring operation documents. Smaller evidence, the kind that says someone was here and they had a life. The most emotionally direct example of presence evidence in Ark Raiders is found in a specific safe house that has been used as a base of operations long enough to accumulate significant personalisation. The personalisation includes the usual environmental storytelling of survival spaces, resource organisation, improvised infrastructure, defence modifications. But one wall of the space, set apart from the functional areas, has been decorated, not with symbols or notes, with an improvised mural painted directly on the wall in whatever media was available, depicting an outdoor scene, trees, sky, horizon, a generalized but clearly intentional depiction of a world that does not look like the ruined landscape outside the safe house door. It is a painting of somewhere else, made by someone who wanted to see it. The mural is not a puzzle. It does not decode. It does not connect to the signal trail, or the faction symbols, or the machine codes. It is just a painting on a wall, made by someone who missed trees and sky, and wanted to see them when they could not go outside to find them. Its presence in the game, as a fully painted texture in a carefully dressed environment, represents a deliberate choice by the design team to include a moment of pure human longing in a world defined by machine threat. It is an Easter egg in the sense that most players do not notice it or linger on it. But finding it and understanding what it is does not generate intellectual excitement the way a lore discovery does. It generates something quieter than that. In the same general zone as the mural safe house, in a ruin that has been picked over by players countless times for its resource density, there is a child-sized sleeping area tucked into a corner of a room that serves no gameplay function. The sleeping area has a small handmade toy placed at its head, clearly crafted from scavenged materials. The toy is not an interactive item. It is a prop, a small detail in a room people walk through without stopping. But someone made it, in-world, in the time since resources became scarce. They had the creativity and the time and the motivation to make a toy. The child who it was made for either needed it then or needs it now, somewhere in the world where the game does not follow. Handmade objects of non-survival utility appear throughout the game's environments at a frequency that, when you start cataloguing them, seems surprising given how dangerous and resource-constrained the world they exist in is. There are handmade objects specifically, a carved piece of wood shaped into a bird, a braided length of cord strung between two fixtures with small objects tied onto it like a garland, a set of small stones arranged in a deliberate geometric pattern on a shelf. None of these are puzzles, none of them decode. They are evidence of the human refusal to treat aesthetic life as a luxury even in survival conditions. And their presence in the world of Ark Raiders, hidden in the corner of rooms that players rush through, is a design statement about the people who made this world and the people they imagine to have lived in it. Personal writing, distinct from the operational documents of the bunker archives, appears in scattered locations as another form of presence evidence. These are not briefing documents or technical notes. They are personal records, journal-style entries on whatever paper was available, covering the kinds of subjects that people write about when they are documenting their lives for themselves. There is a page of what appears to be a recipe, adapted for post-invasion ingredient availability. There is what looks like a list of names, with small symbols next to each one. the kind of personalized organizational note that someone might keep to track who can be trusted or what everyone's strengths are. There is a drawing of a floor plan, annotated with notes about which rooms are safe and which are not, made by someone mapping their own space for survival reasons. The recipe is particularly striking in context because it represents a desire for something specific to eat. Not just caloric intake, but a particular food with particular associations. Someone in the post-invasion world of Ark Raiders was thinking about a specific dish and trying to figure out how to approximate it with what they had. The original ingredient list is crossed out and replaced with alternatives. The quantities are noted with precision. The method is described in the kind of shorthand that suggests a person who has made this dish many times and does not need to write out every step in full. This is a person with a culinary memory, someone for whom food is connected to a life that existed before, and who is trying, in the ruins of that life, to keep some small thread of it alive. The accumulation of these small human details, the mural, the toy, the carved bird, the garland, the recipe, the floor plan, creates a hidden layer of Ark Raiders that functions differently from all the other hidden layers we've discussed. The lore layers tell you about what happened and who did what. The developer signature layer tells you about who made the game. The cross-reference layer tells you what the makers were thinking about. This layer, the presence evidence layer, tells you what the people in the world were feeling. It does not tell you their names or what they accomplished. It tells you they missed trees. It tells you they made toys for children. It tells you they cooked and organised and drew floor plans and arranged stones on shelves. It tells you they were alive in all the ways that matter, and that the Ark machines have not taken all of that away. Chapter 10. The Machine's Language. We have spent significant time in this video looking at what is hidden in the human spaces of Ark Raiders, in the bunkers and safe houses and ruins where people lived and left evidence. But the Ark machines have their own hidden content layer that we have only partially explored. The machine codes and chassis symbols from Chapter 2 are part of this layer, but there is more to the machine language than what can be read from their physical design. The machines communicate with each other, or at least exhibit behavior that functions like communication, and that behavior contains patterns that are not explained by the game's surface mechanics, and that suggest something about the machine intelligence at a level deeper than the game makes explicit. The most systematic study of Ark machine communication behavior was conducted over several months by a community member with a background in behavior analysis using recorded session footage to track machine responses to various stimuli. The findings were detailed and methodical, and among the results were several behavioral patterns that could not be attributed to standard enemy AI logic. The most significant was the observation that Ark machines, in certain zone configurations, exhibit a call and response behavior that is too consistent to be coincidental. A machine of one type will perform a specific motion or emit a specific sound, and a machine of a different type, at a distance that should preclude any simple proximity-based trigger, will perform a distinct response behavior within a consistent time window. The call and response pattern is most clearly observed in specific zone configurations where both crawler class and larger machine types are present. The crawler will stop, perform a slow 360-degree rotation, which is sometimes observed during standard scan behavior, but which in this context occurs more rapidly and at a specific moment. And within approximately 3 to 5 seconds, a larger machine in the vicinity will alter its patrol route, not dramatically, not in a way that would register as obviously responsive, but systematically in the same direction relative to the crawler's final facing after its rotation, as if the crawler's rotation was a directional signal and the larger machine acted on it. If this behavior is a real communication mechanism, then the machines are coordinating at a level that the game's official mechanics do not describe. The standard mechanical explanation for machine coordination in extraction shooters is proximity-based alert sharing. One machine detects a player, and other machines in range are alerted. The call and response behavior observed here is different. It is not triggered by player proximity. It occurs in areas where no players are present, during machine idle cycles, apparently for operational purposes that have nothing to do with responding to the player threat. The machines are talking to each other when there's nothing to fight about. The content of this machine-to-machine communication, what the rotation is signaling to the larger machine, what the route adjustment means in terms of operational logic, is not decodable through behavioral observation alone. But the machine codes we examined in Chapter 2 offer a possible framework. If the codes define machine roles and operational categories, then the call and response behavior might be routine status reporting, a crawler informing a larger unit about the outcome of a zone scan, the larger unit adjusting its patrol to account for the report. This would suggest the machines are running a distributed coordination protocol, maintaining shared situational awareness across the zone through ongoing low-level communication. A distributed coordination protocol in a game about fighting machines is not law-shattering on its own. Of course, the machines coordinate. That is how they are effective. But the implication of the behavioral patterns, combined with the machine codes, is that the coordination is more sophisticated and more purposeful than simply responding to player presence. The machines are maintaining an understanding of the zone that is independent of and prior to any human activity. They are tracking something on their own schedule, reporting on their own agenda, adjusting to information that comes from each other rather than from whatever sensors detect the player. The machines have an ongoing life in the zone that exists whether or not you are there, and the hidden behavior patterns are the evidence of it. The machine patrol routes themselves contain hidden detail that once noticed becomes impossible to unsee. In zones where multiple machine types share patrol responsibilities, the routes have gaps, not random gaps, coverage lapses of the kind you would expect from AI pathing approximations, but consistent gaps that appear in the same locations across multiple sessions and multiple playthroughs. These gaps are exploitable by experienced players who know the zone well because they represent consistent windows where movement is possible without triggering detection. But they are also curious as design objects. The gaps are specifically sized. They are not so large as to make the patrol coverage useless. They are precisely calibrated to allow passage while maintaining the appearance of coverage. The precision of the patrol gaps points in two possible directions. One is that the gaps are intentional player affordances, designed by the development team to allow experienced players paths through contested zones as a reward for map knowledge. This is a common design approach in stealth and encounter games. The other direction is lore interesting, that the gaps are intentional in a different sense, that within the fiction of the game, they represent a deliberate feature of the patrol design. Spaces left open for a reason, connected to whatever the machines are actually doing in the zone beyond deterring human presence. If the machines are coordinating toward a specific operational objective, they might be leaving access channels open for reasons that serve that objective, rather than their guard function. The second interpretation, that patrol gaps are intentional in-world rather than just player affordance, connects to one of the most contested hidden content theories in the community. The theory proposes that the ARC machines are not simply occupying territory in the game zones. They are conducting a survey, a systematic cataloging operation, and the patrol patterns are organized to gather specific information about specific locations over time, rather than to maximize area coverage. Under this theory, the gaps in coverage are the machine equivalent of a blind spot cultivated deliberately, areas where whatever is being surveyed would introduce measurement error or interference if the machines were too close to it. You leave gaps around your instruments. The survey theory is speculative in ways that the behavioral observation findings are not, but it has attracted serious consideration from people who do not normally engage with fan theory content because it fits the evidence from the machine codes, the geographic distribution of those codes pointing to specific landmarks, the coordinated call and response between different machine types, the consistent patrol gaps. All of it aligns with a coherent operational purpose that goes beyond simple territorial control. The machines are doing something with the information their sensors gather. They are doing it according to a plan encoded in their chassis markings. And the plan covers specific locations that, not coincidentally, align with locations identified by other Easter egg chains as significant in the world's hidden history. The ultimate question this chapter circles without reaching a landing is what the machines are for at the deepest level. The surface narrative says invasion, occupation, extinction, level threat to human civilization. The hidden content layer says something more complicated. The machines carry codes pointing to human coordinates. They have a symbol connecting them to a human institution. Their idle audio contains processed human speech cadences. Their behavior involves sophisticated coordination toward objectives not explained by the overt narrative. If the machines were built or designed by or in connection with human actors, as the institution symbol suggests, then the invasion framing may be incomplete. Something was set in motion by someone with intentions that the catastrophe of the Ark arrival has obscured. What those intentions were, and whether any of the surviving humans in the game world understand them, is the deepest open question in Ark Raider's hidden content. Chapter 11. The final layer. We have travelled through the signal trail and the machine codes, through the bunker archives and the developer signatures and the frequencies and the symbols. We have looked at photographs and mural paintings and handmade toys. We have watched machine patrol patterns and heard the processed cadence of something that might once have been a voice. This final chapter is where the threads collected across the previous 10 chapters get laid out together, not to be resolved into a definitive answer, but to show the shape of what they collectively suggest. And then we go deeper to the handful of Easter egg discoveries that fit nowhere in the established chains, the outliers, the anomalies, the final hidden layer that does not fully connect to anything yet, and may represent the next stage of what this game's hidden content is trying to say. Before the final discoveries, a quick retrospective on the coherence of the narrative that has emerged. The signal trail establishes that the Ark invasion was preceded by a detectable signal, and that at least one group of people operating in a professional technical capacity received it and acted on it. The monitoring operation is connected to a human institution whose symbol also appears on Ark machine chassis, suggesting a link between whoever was doing the monitoring and whatever produced the machines. The machines themselves carry coordinates pointing to specific locations in the game world, are coded with behavioral classifications, and exhibit communication behavior, suggesting they are pursuing a specific operational agenda. The bunker archives document the people involved in the monitoring operation and show what happened to them over time. The photographs complete the human story at the personal scale. The recurring symbols suggest a survivor community or a single persistent individual moving through the world and marking it in a consistent language. The frequencies suggest an ongoing broadcast from a location near the crater, the geographic centre of the signal trail, and the first Ark landing site. The shape of all this, when you pull back to look at it as a whole, is a story about a group of people who knew the Ark invasion was coming, who had connections to whatever produced the machines, and who either failed to stop it or chose not to try. The last option is the uncomfortable one. What if the monitoring operation was not trying to prevent the invasion, but to ensure it? What if the institution symbol on the Ark machine chassis is not a coincidence of shared origins, but a mark of authorship, the creator's mark on the product? What if the people in the photographs, the monitoring operation personnel, were not victims of the invasion, but its architects? The game does not answer this question, but it has arranged the evidence in a way that makes the question impossible to avoid if you have followed all the threads. The first final layer discovery is a geographic one that took an extraordinary amount of coordinate work to establish. Across the game's zones, there are natural features, rock formations, terrain contours that do not appear to have been designed for aesthetic or gameplay purposes. They are too specific, too oddly shaped for ambient terrain filler. When the positions of these formations are mapped and their orientations are plotted on a grid, they define a pattern. The pattern is large, spanning multiple zones, requiring the highest level view of the game's geography to perceive. But when seen at that scale, it is unmistakably a symbol, one of the symbols from our recurring symbol vocabulary. Specifically, the asymmetric circle, the one associated with older buildings and possible pre-invasion institutional history. The landscape itself, at a scale that no single player can perceive during normal play, carries the symbol of the oldest and least explained faction in the game. If the landscape scale symbol is intentional, it is the most ambitious hidden detail in the game, and possibly one of the most ambitious in any game in recent memory. It requires the design team to have consciously placed specific terrain features with specific orientations to form a specific shape at a specific scale across multiple zones designed by multiple people. The logistical challenge of hiding something at that scale is considerable, which is part of why it took so long to document. But the analysis is solid, the positions are consistent, and the scale is right for the asymmetric circle form. Embark Studios may have hidden a faction symbol in the physical geography of the game world itself. The second final layer discovery is a temporal one. In the game's day-night cycle, there is a specific moment in each cycle where the lighting conditions produce a particular effect on one of the outdoor zones. The effect is brief, lasting only a few minutes of real time before the light angle changes and the effect disappears. During this window, shadows cast by specific structural features in the zone align to create a legible configuration on the ground. The alignment produces text, not symbolic text, but alphabetic text, short enough to be read in the brief window before it changes. The text reads in the seconds it is visible as a two-word phrase. The phrase, which has been photographed and documented by multiple community members who have happened to be in the right place at the right time during the right cycle phase, does not obviously connect to anything else in the game's hidden content. The two-word phrase has been intensively analysed for connection to other Easter egg chains, for coded meaning, for reference to developer names, or in-game characters, or external media. None of the analyses have produced a definitive connection. The phrase is legible, but currently interpretively isolated. This makes it either the entry point of a new hidden content chain that has not yet been traced, or a standalone Easter egg that is its own complete statement, rather than a clue to something further. The phrase has an emotional quality that suggests the latter interpretation may be more appropriate, though the community's preference is always to hope it is the former. The third final layer discovery is the one that has generated the most sustained and intense discussion in the community, because it suggests a hidden content system that, if confirmed, would change how the game's Easter egg ecosystem is understood. Multiple players have independently reported that specific sequences of actions performed in specific locations at specific times in the game cycle produce non-standard responses from the environment. Not audio triggers, like the bunker music. Something more diffuse, a subtle change in the visual presentation of the surrounding area, a lighting shift, or a texture variation, or a sound element not present in normal conditions, that lasts briefly and then disappears without leaving any evidence it occurred. These environmental micro-responses are not consistently documented or reproducible in the way that the bunker music trigger has been established. They rely on player testimony and on a small number of screenshots and recordings that show something unusual without clearly showing what caused it. The skeptical interpretation is that the apparent responses are coincidental framings of normal environmental variation, lighting changes that happen to occur during the reported interaction sequences without being caused by them. The interested interpretation is that there is a layer of environmental reactivity in the game that has not been mapped, that the world responds to player presence and action in ways that go beyond the established interaction systems, and that most players have never encountered because the conditions for triggering the responses are narrow and not intuitively connected to any visible mechanic. If the environmental micro-response system is real, it would represent a hidden gameplay layer rather than a hidden content layer, the Easter egg equivalent of a secret mechanic rather than a secret story. The implications of this for the game's overall hidden content design would be significant. It would mean that the investigation of Ark Raiders' secrets is not just a reading exercise, cataloguing and connecting static environmental details, but also an interactive one, where specific actions in specific places generate new evidence that leads to new understanding. The investigation would be alive in a way that purely observational Easter egg research never is. The micro-response reports have not produced a confirmed triggerable sequence, as of the most recent community documentation. But they have not been definitively debunked either. The honest assessment is that something is being reported by multiple independent observers with sufficient consistency to warrant continued investigation, but that the evidence base is not yet solid enough to declare a system confirmed. This is where the Ark Raiders' hidden content frontier currently lives, at the edge of what is known and what might be true, in the gap between documented discovery and ongoing search. There are smaller final layer items worth noting before we wrap up the chapter. A specific piece of text found in a bunker archive document in the second line of the third paragraph of a briefing page that most researchers had categorized as entirely redacted turns out under enhanced contrast to have legible text beneath the redaction bar. The legible text is not a revelation, it is a line of administrative notation, the kind of line you would expect in a classified document, referencing a project designation. The designation is a number and letter combination that has not appeared anywhere else in the documented Easter egg chains. It is either a new thread to pull, or it is exactly what it looks like at face value, an unremarkable administrative notation in a prop document. Figuring out which it is requires finding the project designation elsewhere in the world, and no one has yet. The last item is less a discovery than an absence. After all the signal trail evidence pointing toward the crater, after the background loop's geographic distribution centering on it, after the relay tower's antenna pointing at it, after the machine code's coordinates clustering near it, the crater itself has been examined extensively by the Easter egg research community and has not yielded a significant hidden content discovery. There is no bunker below it, no terminal with a frozen login, no maintenance log with developer names, no child's drawing. The geographic center of all the signal trail breadcrumbs is, as far as anyone has been able to determine, empty of hidden content. Either the crater's secrets have not been found, which seems unlikely given the intensity of the search, or the crater is deliberately empty, which is the more interesting possibility. The crater is where everything points, and nothing is there. As a design choice, that is either the most frustrating thing in the game's hidden content, or the most honest. The center of every mystery is empty. The signal before the fall arrived, and whatever it was calling toward, it is gone now, or it was never there to begin with, and all the evidence pointing to it points to an absence. Every thread leads to the crater leads to nothing. And the machines still walk the zones, carrying their codes and their chassis symbols, and their processed voice fragments, doing whatever they are doing, on whatever schedule their creators or their owners or their original designers intended, while the people with their murals and their toy birds and their handmade garlands live below ground and mark walls with symbols that say they were here, they were here, they were here. That is the shape of it. Not a solved puzzle, not a complete story with a resolution and a moral. A shape. The kind of shape you can only see when you have walked the whole perimeter of it, which is what this video has been, a slow walk around something very large in the dark. Let me tell you what I think is actually going on here, not as a theory to be confirmed or denied, but as the most honest reading I can offer of everything we have covered. Embark Studios built Ark Raiders as 2 games at once. The first game is the one everyone plays, an extraction shooter with well-designed enemies and satisfying resource loops and a compelling visual identity. That game is good. It stands on its own. The second game is the one we have spent the last several hours exploring, a game that exists entirely in negative space, in the things the first game does not say, in the details that have no gameplay function, in the trails that lead to empty places. That second game is not for everyone. It is not even for most people. It is for the specific subset of players who cannot walk past a chest-height waveform on a rusted wall without stopping to look at it. The deliberate construction of a second game inside a first game, one that requires a completely different mode of attention to access, is not new as an idea. Games have been doing versions of this for decades. What is unusual about Ark Raiders is the commitment to doing it without any concession to discoverability. No achievement pings when you find the signal trail. No in-game acknowledgement that you have assembled the photo series. No indicator that the machine codes mean something. The second game does not want to be found by the first game systems. It wants to be found by people who are paying a different kind of attention, and it is patient enough to wait for them. That patience is what gives the hidden content its emotional weight when you do find it. The person who circled the date 37 days before the invasion on that calendar did not do it for a reward. The people in the photographs did not pose for a trophy. The child's drawing was not a collectible. The recipe with the crossed-out ingredients did not unlock a skin. These things exist in the world because the world would be less true without them, and the people who find them feel that truth without needing to be told it is there. The game trusts the right players to find the right layer. That trust is the Easter egg. What the entire hidden content structure of Ark Raiders finally amounts to, if I had to name it in one sentence, is this. The world the machines came to destroy was full of real people, and those people were full of the same things people have always been full of: foreknowledge and fear and care for children and grief and desire for specific foods and the need to mark walls to say they were there. The machines are impressive. The signal trail is ingenious. The developer signatures are delightful. But the recipe with the crossed-out ingredients is the thing that stays with me longest after I close the game. Someone in that world wanted a specific meal and was trying to make it from ruins. And Embark Studios put that on a piece of paper and hid it in the corner of a room and trusted that someday someone would stop to read it. And now you have. There is still more to find. The project designation from the redacted briefing, the shadow text at the specific lighting window, the environmental micro-responses that multiple players have independently reported without establishing a reproducible trigger, the crater that everything points toward and that has yielded nothing yet, the complete reading of the landscape scale symbol that spans multiple zones. The hidden content research community working on Ark Raiders is not close to done, and I expect that the next major discovery, when it comes, will reframe some of what we have covered today in the same way that each major discovery so far has reframed what came before it. When that happens, I will be here, and we will go back through all of it together, because that is what this kind of game demands, and what this kind of game deserves: slow attention, honest interpretation, The willingness to sit with an empty crater and admit that sometimes the center of every mystery is just an absence, and the trail was the thing, not the destination. If you made it to the end of this video, you are exactly the kind of person this content exists for, and I mean that without any irony at all. Thank you for watching. If you found something in Ark Raiders that we did not cover here, please put it in the comments, because the collective intelligence of this community has found things I would never have found alone, and the trail is better walked with company. Subscribe if you want to be there when the next layer surfaces, and until then, check your walls, keep your eyes at chest height, and read everything. That closes out the video in the same meditative, essayistic register the script maintains throughout, with a proper outro that doubles back on the thematic core, lands on an emotional note, and gives the audience a call to action that feels earned rather than tacked on. Let me know if you'd like to adjust the tone, length, or anything about the ending. Chapter 12. The Architecture of Before. There is a way of reading buildings that most people do not use because most people do not need to. Structural archaeologists do it. Historians of material culture do it. The players who have spent the most time in Ark Raiders environments have started doing it too, not because they trained for it, but because the game rewards it, quietly and without announcement, the way all the best things in Ark Raiders are rewarded. The buildings in the game's zones are not all from the same period. This is visible in the surface design. The obvious stylistic differences between older industrial structures and more recent construction, between the poured concrete aesthetic of facilities built decades ago and the modular prefab language of things assembled in the years immediately before the invasion. Most players register this as visual variety, the kind of environmental diversity that makes a game world feel lived in rather than built yesterday. But when you start cross-referencing architectural period with the locations of hidden content discoveries, a pattern emerges that is too consistent to be atmospheric. The oldest buildings in the game world, structures whose architectural language suggests construction predating the pre-invasion period by several decades, at minimum, cluster in specific areas of the map, not randomly distributed, clustered, and those clusters correspond with a precision that requires actual coordinate comparison to establish to the locations where the asymmetric circle symbol has been found. The oldest buildings are marked with the oldest symbol. The symbol that has been in the world the longest is on the structures that have been in the world the longest. This sounds like it should be obvious. A symbol associated with old buildings appears on old buildings. Of course it does. But the implication runs deeper than simple consistency. The asymmetric circle is not a decorative feature of the architectural style. It appears only on specific surfaces within specific old buildings, in locations that do not fit a structural or ornamental purpose. It is applied, not built in. Someone put the symbol on those buildings, and whoever did it chose the oldest buildings specifically. The symbol is a claim. It says these buildings belong to something, and whatever that something is, it was old before the invasion made everything else old. The interior design of the oldest buildings contains equipment that is not contemporary with their construction period. The machinery visible through broken walls and collapsed ceilings includes items whose design language is recognizably more recent than the buildings themselves. Equipment that was installed in old structures rather than built with them. This tells a simple story on its surface: older buildings repurposed for newer operations, the kind of adaptive reuse that happens to infrastructure when resources are constrained. But the specific equipment visible in the oldest buildings, cross-referenced with the equipment depicted in the early photographs of the monitoring operation personnel, matches the monitoring station aesthetic. The old buildings were repurposed for the monitoring operation. The monitoring operation chose old buildings for its field stations. Buildings marked with the asymmetric circle symbol. Buildings associated with an institution that predates the invasion by decades and whose symbol appears on Ark machine chassis. The oldest buildings in the game world were apparently already associated with the institution connected to the Ark machines before the machines arrived. This is the institutional history that the recurring symbol chapter gestured toward and could not fully articulate. The institution is old, it has been in this world for a long time, and when the monitoring operation started tracking the pre-invasion signal, it set up in buildings that already belonged to the institution whose symbol the machines carry. That sequence of implication is not spelled out anywhere in the game. You arrive at it by triangulating between architectural period analysis, symbol placement, equipment identification, and photograph comparison. It requires 4 separate areas of Easter egg research to intersect before the shape becomes visible. This is the kind of hidden content that can only exist in a game with a sufficiently dense and consistent hidden layer, where separate chains of evidence, developed independently by different researchers, turn out to be facets of the same underlying truth. The oldest building type in the game, the one that appears in the most structurally compromised condition and whose construction period is estimated furthest back by the visual analysis community, has one preserved room in the specific instance that has been most thoroughly explored. The room contains nothing of gameplay value. No resources, no documents, no interactive objects. Just walls, a floor, and a ceiling that has partially survived the structural damage around it. On one of the walls, beneath a layer of environmental dressing that took significant effort to virtually clear away through camera manipulation, there is a large symbol. Not one of the 4 recurring hidden symbols from the symbol chapter. Something else, something that has not appeared anywhere else in the game. The new symbol is complex compared to the others. It has multiple components. It is large, occupying a significant portion of the wall surface, suggesting it was painted or applied with some care and at some size. Its components include forms that are reminiscent of but not identical to several of the existing recurring symbols, as if it were a composite or a precursor, a master symbol, from which the others derive. Whether this reading is correct or whether the similarity is incidental is an open question, but the discovery of this symbol in the oldest building in the game, in the only preserved room in the most structurally ancient structure, carries the feeling of finding something foundational. This may be where the symbol language began. The wall symbol has been photographed and documented. It has been compared extensively to the 4 known recurring symbols without producing a definitive relationship diagram. It has been analysed for possible decoding as a diagrammatic representation of information, a map, a schematic, a sequence, without consensus result. It is currently the most discussed unsolved item in the Ark Raiders hidden content community, not because of its complexity specifically, but because of where it was found and what that location implies about its age and significance. If the building is old enough, the symbol predates everything else in the game's hidden layer. It predates the monitoring operation, the pre-invasion briefing documents, the child's drawings, all of it. Whatever the symbol means, it was put on that wall a very long time ago, by someone affiliated with an institution that the Ark machines also carry, in a building that was later repurposed to listen for a signal that came 37 days before machines fell from the sky. The architecture of before is the game's longest hidden timeline. The signal trail, the photo series, the bunker archives, all of those document a period of a few years at most, the run-up to and immediate aftermath of the invasion. The architectural analysis opens a timeline stretching back decades, to a time before anyone in the game's surface narrative seems to have been born, when buildings were being built and marked and used by an institution that still apparently exists in some form, because its symbol is fresh on the crawlers walking the zones right now. This is not a dead history, it is a living one. The institution with the asymmetric circle symbol did not end with the invasion. It may have caused it. It may have survived it. It may be the invasion. Chapter 13. The Weather. This chapter is short. Not every discovery needs a long treatment, and the weather Easter egg is one of the most self-contained and complete hidden details in the game. A small mystery with a small answer that does not connect to any larger chain. It is here because it's beautiful, and because it illustrates something important about the range of what Embark Studios hides and why. The game's weather system is dynamic. Rain, overcast conditions, clear skies, fog, all cycle through the zones on schedules that players have extensively charted for their gameplay implications, visibility changes, audio masking, the conditions under which certain encounters are easier or harder. The weather system is well designed from a functional standpoint and atmospheric from a visual one. Most players understand it as a gameplay system and a visual element and nothing more. In one specific zone, during a specific combination of weather conditions and time of day that occurs with moderate frequency, something happens to a particular body of standing water. The water is a wide, shallow pool formed in a natural depression in the terrain, the kind of landscape feature that serves as a visual anchor and a landmark but has no gameplay function. Under normal conditions, it reflects sky and surrounding terrain in the standard environmental way. But during the specific weather and light combination, the reflection in the water shows something that is not present in the scene above it, not a dramatic revelation, not a vision of another world, just a detail. A small light source visible in the reflection at a position where there is no corresponding light source in the geometry above. The reflected light that has no source has been documented by several players who noticed it independently. It is not an error. It appears consistently under the right conditions and disappears when those conditions change. It was placed. The question of what it represents produced theories ranging from a reference to a specific external work of art to a deliberate signal that something is hidden beneath the water surface, to a simple aesthetic choice by an environment artist who wanted to put something quiet and strange in a corner of the world for its own sake. The answer, or at least the most compelling interpretation the community has arrived at, draws on the child's drawing from the Bunker Archives chapter. The drawing depicted descending objects, above and smaller figures, below. If the water reflection is read, as the child's drawing made literal, a sky that shows something different from the ground level view, then the reflected light is a visual metaphor embedded in the game's weather system. The world above looks one way. What it reflects, what it has always contained, looks different. The machines came from up there. Someone saw them in the reflection before they saw them in the sky. That reading may be too elegant to be correct. But the reflected light is there, and it is intentional, and it appears under specific conditions in a game that has demonstrated it will reward specific observation with specific meaning. Whatever it is a gift from an environment artist to the person who is standing at the water's edge at the right moment and happened to look down. Chapter 14. The Unanswered Call. Every Easter egg chain in Ark Raiders has an endpoint. The signal trail ends at the receiver in the collapsed room. The photo series ends at the 2 survivors in the ruins. The machine codes end at the coordinates, which end at the crater, which ends at nothing. The chains are designed to reach conclusions, or to reach deliberate inconclusiveness that functions as a conclusion. But there is one chain in the game that does not end. It simply stops mid-sequence and does not resume. Not because the answer is emptiness, because the answer has not been found yet, or has not been left yet, and the distinction between those two possibilities is one of the most interesting open questions in the game's hidden content. The chain in question begins with a set of handwritten numbers found on the interior wall of a specific bunker access corridor. The corridor is transitional space, the kind players move through quickly on the way to functional areas. The numbers are at eye level on the right-hand wall, written in the same handwriting style, as the tuning instructions found on the folded paper behind the coffee mug in the Signal Trail chapter. This is the first link. The same person who left the tuning instructions also wrote these numbers in this corridor. The numbers are a sequence, 11 digits with a spacing pattern that breaks them into groups of 3, 3, 3, and 2. This grouping pattern matches no standard encoding format that has been identified. It is not a phone number, not a coordinate pair in any projection, not a date in any standard format, not a binary or hexadecimal sequence that decodes to something legible. It has been run through every analysis approach the community applies to coded sequences in the game and has not resolved. It is either a code type that has not been identified, or it is a code that requires a key that has not been found. What makes the sequence a chain rather than a dead end is that part of it appears again. Not all 11 digits. A subsequence of 5 specific digits in the same order appears on a terminal readout in a completely different zone, on a screen displaying what would normally read as a system error code. System error codes in the game's terminal props are standardized. They follow formats that players have catalogued extensively. This error code deviates from the standard format in exactly the positions occupied by the 5-digit subsequence. The deviation is the signal. Someone embedded 5 digits of the corridor sequence into a terminal error code in a different zone. Following a 5-digit subsequence across zones is the kind of lateral connection that only becomes visible through systematic documentation of apparently unrelated environmental details, the kind of work that takes months of community effort to accumulate. Once the connection was established, the next step was obvious. Find where the remaining digits appear. 6 digits are still unaccounted for, split into a 3-digit prefix and a 3-digit suffix around the 5 found in the terminal. Those 6 digits have not been found. The chain is mid-sequence and has been since the terminal connection was documented. Either the remaining components exist in the game and have not been found, or they exist somewhere that the current community investigation has not reached, or they are waiting to be added. In a game that receives updates, the possibility that hidden content is placed incrementally, that a chain can be intentionally left incomplete and extended over time, is real. The unanswered call is the most forward-looking Easter egg in the game. All the other chains are archaeological. They document a past that the game has already built. This one points at something that may not exist yet, a hidden content feature that is still arriving, a sequence that will be complete when the game decides it is complete. Waiting for it is a different kind of engagement from searching for what is already there. It is collaborative in a way that static Easter eggs are not, the developer and the community both maintaining their end of an ongoing conversation, and the player, who is in the right place when the next component appears, will complete a chain that someone deliberately left open for them. That is not just an Easter egg. That is a relationship. Chapter 15. Why any of this matters. I want to end the video differently from how I ended the main chapter sequence. The outro we already have is the emotional close, the one that is about the recipe with the crossed out ingredients and what it means that someone made a toy bird from scavenged materials. This chapter is something else. This is the part where I try to answer the question that anyone who has spent time deep in Easter egg research eventually has to confront, which is why. Why does it matter that these things are in the game? Why does it matter that someone finds them? Why does it matter that the waveform is identical across locations, that the machine codes point to coordinates, that the crater is empty, that the reflected light has no source? None of it changes the gameplay. None of it unlocks anything. None of it makes you better at the extraction loop, or helps you survive a run, or gives you resources. The game that most people play is unaffected by any of it. So why? The answer I keep coming back to is that it matters for the same reason that the mural in the safe house matters to the person who painted it. Not because it does anything, because it says something. The mural says someone was here, and they had an interior life that the survival context did not extinguish. The Easter eggs say someone built this world, and they had an interior life that the production context did not extinguish. The person who encoded a pre-invasion transmission date in a serial number format on a relay tower, who positioned that tower to point at the first Ark landing site, who placed a tuning note behind a coffee mug for someone to find a decade after it was written, that person was not fulfilling a requirement, they were speaking, and the player who follows the chain is the one they were speaking to. Games are the only medium where the audience can find things the author hid specifically for the act of finding. A novelist cannot put a secret in a book that only appears when a reader looks behind the bookshelf. A filmmaker cannot hide a frame in a theatre for someone patient enough to pause the projector at the right moment. But a game designer can put a symbol at chest height on a wall that nobody has any reason to look at, and wait, and trust that somewhere in the thousands of hours players will spend in that world, one person will stop and look and see it. That trust is a form of intimacy that almost no other medium can achieve. Ark Raiders has built more of that trust into its architecture than almost any game I can point to in the current landscape. In an era when hidden content is almost universally connected to achievement systems, when the surprise of discovery has been largely replaced by the checklist of completion, Ark Raiders made a different choice. It hid things because hiding things was worth doing. It built a second game for the people who would look for it. It put a recipe and a toy bird, and a painted mural and a child's drawing into a world of machine invaders, and trusted that the people who needed to find those things would find them. This video has been my attempt to honour that trust by doing the work thoroughly and presenting it honestly, flagging interpretation as interpretation and evidence as evidence, and not overselling the certainty of connections that are real but not proven. The hidden content of Ark Raiders deserves that treatment, not because it's a puzzle to be solved, but because it's a conversation to be respected. Embark Studios built one end of it, the community built the other, and somewhere in the middle, in the specific gap between what was hidden and what was found, the game becomes more than a game. It becomes the thing all the best games eventually become, a place where the people who made it and the people who played it met each other, and neither side knew quite what they were building toward, and the not knowing was exactly right. The machines still walk the zones, the crater is still empty. 37 days before, someone circled a date on a calendar. The signal came, the machines fell, the people went below ground. The walls are marked, they were here. So were we.